Good morning guys, and today I'm going to redo a video I made much earlier in my channel history and botanize the coral pink sand dunes. They start right here, and I'm just so excited to talk about all the species we have here. I love sand dunes, I love talking about sand dune ecology, and I have a really good feeling about this one. Look at all that. Right off, what I'm seeing here is Scabrethia scabra, a favorite of mine. It's being mostly done blooming right now, formerly placed in the genus Waiifia, but I guess they realized Waiifia was paraphyletic, so we had to put this one in a monotypic genus. Formerly Waiifia scabra, we just changed Waiifia to Scabrethia to make its genus name. Yeah, you can see it looks very much like a Waiifia or a Balsamorhiza, to which they're all very closely related. They're all each other's closest relatives. And this plant loves growing on sand dunes. It's commonly called the Badlands Mules-ears. I really think sand dune mule-ear is a better name for it. And we have this grass over here, which is actually very rare in Utah. It is either Sporobolus arenicola or Calamovilfa gigantea. And I think the coral pink sand dunes are one of the few places in the state of Utah you can find this. It's usually native to the Great Plains, but it's rare in the western United States as far as I'm aware, certainly in the state of Utah. It seems to do very well in the sand dunes here. But this is only a small taste of what we're going to see today. Just to clarify, the reason I'm not sure which name to use for this plant is because the literature suggests it could either be part of Calamovilfa or Sporobolus. At least according to the Utah Wildflower app, it uses Sporobolus arenicola, but I've heard other places use Calamovilfa gigantea, so I'm not sure what the best one is. Now, just to give a basic rundown of the coral pink sand dunes, these dunes are formed mostly from eroding Navajo sandstone. Sandstone is, or actually sand in general, is usually kind of white because it's mostly made of quartz, but this is enriched with iron oxide, which gives it this sort of reddish pink color. I'm sure if you see all the red rock in Utah, that's mostly iron oxide tainted sandstone, so it causes it to look like that, or mudstone in some cases. Basically, it's iron oxide that gives this thing its pinkish color. And essentially there is a mountain out in the distance there that the sand dunes butt up against, and wind consistently blows eroding sand into them and occasionally back a little bit, shaping these dunes over time, keeping them in a very static equilibrium. That's generally how dunes, especially inland dunes, form. I mean, oceanic dunes just form by the same forces, but on the seashore. Oceanic dunes, that's a bit funny way to put it. Here's another important grass I've been seeing. This is, I'm pretty sure, Muhlenbergia pungens, or Sandhill Muhly. Now, Muhlenbergia is a pretty important genus of grass, especially in Mexico. There's like over 100 species there, but you also get some in North America. I think a fair number, actually. I just happen to know there's a lot in Mexico. I should go over sometimes, but either way, it's a plant that's very well adapted to the dunes because you can see it's able to grow and spread through its roots and pop out through the sand as it shifts and buries other plants. I'm going to talk more about that later, but it's a very critical feature of the dunes and why they're so hard for most plants to survive on. The fact that they're constantly shifting. Wind is always blowing sand back and forth, moving dunes and tearing them apart. And plants don't like that so much. They like stability. They like to have everything go right when they're growing somewhere because they can't get up and move. I mean, sometimes they can, like the plants here, propagate through the roots and spread outward, but they can't travel any great distances here. So sand dunes are a very tough place for most plants to survive on because they directly attack that stability they need so much. So you need some special adaptations to thrive here. One of them, as I mentioned before, is the ability to propagate through the roots. Another helpful one is to grow roots all along the stem after you get buried, because it essentially just allows you to reroot. You also need a tolerance of getting buried, because a lot of plants, when they get buried up the trunk even a little bit, as I'm sure some of you planters who watch my channel might know, that's very bad for plants. Many plant species can't handle their trunks getting buried to any significant degree because they'll just start to rot. It's only having that moisture held up against you, and I guess in the desert it's not always the biggest issue, having moisture held close to your stem even when you're buried like this. But it's still something many plants have to contend with. And some plants have to be very aggressive growers too, to be able to grow quickly in case they get buried very quickly, so they can pop up again and start doing what they do, photosynthesizing, drawing up water through the soil and all that stuff. And they also need, at the same time, the ability to handle getting their roots exposed. That's another thing most plants don't like. I think most plants can handle it better than getting buried, but a lot of plants that get their roots exposed will start getting attacked by the elements. They're not meant to be above ground for any significant period of time. So there's a lot of adaptations that plants need to thrive in the dunelands here. And like I said, this Muhlenbergia pungens has probably all of those. But we're in a bit more of a flat area here. As you can see, there's a lot more vegetation now, including species that you more often associate with not sand dune areas. So another cool thing about dunes is that there's a lot of different microsites that can support different species in all the areas. We're going to see some incredibly deep sand. They'll be mostly bare. We're going to see some wetlands today, or semi-wetlands. Areas that just barely have the characteristic of wetland. I just made it turn semi-wetland up on the spot. But in a gentle area like this, not so inhospitable to plant growth, we get stuff like big sagebrush, Artemisia tridentata. I'm guessing, actually I have no clue what variety this is. I was going to say Wyomingensis, but I truthfully don't know. It just seems like the right elevation for it. You can hear a lot of ATVers here. Of course, I'm in a portion of the Coral Pink Sand Dunes that is not part of a state park. It's part of a wilderness study area, but I guess they do allow some ATV use here, which I'm kind of annoyed by. I was kind of hoping this area could be turned into a wilderness area eventually, but that might make it a little difficult. And we're also getting Juniperus osteosperma, the Utah juniper, which can really handle a surprising level of variable soil conditions. Like you can see them growing in sand or nearly bare rock, harsh alkali soil and the like. So it's no surprise we're seeing them thriving on this sand dunes, at least in the more gentle sites where it's not very duney. This is sort of like a back swale. Not sure that's the right term, but the point is, you had a bit of a foredune there where it was much deeper sand and we didn't see any junipers there, but now we're getting them. This plant is Ericameria nauseosa, or some close relative or a variety of Ericameria nauseosa. I couldn't tell you which it is. I've noticed rubber rabbitbrush does very well in sandy soil. It is a member of Asteraceae, which doesn't actually have anything to do with it being able to tolerate sandy soil. I just wanted to point that out if you guys didn't know. Really great plant with some pretty gross smelling flowers, which is kind of cool. It smells like really old, sweaty, mildewy socks. So I wonder what species is attracted to that. Oh, and they bloom in the very late summer, early autumn, which is important to a lot of pollinators if they're looking for a good meal right before it's time to go dormant for the year. Another classic from all over the Colorado Plateau and the broader West, not just sandy areas. In fact, I don't think it grows in super deep sand, more like this type of sand. This is Eriocoma hymenoides, formerly I think Actinathra hymenoides or something like that, also known as Indian ricegrass. Probably my favorites out here, which makes me happy that it's so abundant because it's a great plant and important food for the first peoples who used to live here, and I still do live here. I guess I don't eat this every day anymore. But yeah, great plant, great forage if you, don't have as consistent agriculture and need to rely on the land and stuff like that. Now you can sort of think of there being a bit of a continuum of sand dune habitat. Like I mentioned this earlier, but you have areas that are maybe just relatively deep sand, but not actually sand dunes, and that's already going to be harsh for some plants, but you still get many species growing here, just like the Juniperus osteosperma and Pinus ponderosa, which we're going to see a lot of here today. I think actually compared to Pinus edulis, the Ponderosa pine does much better in shallow soil and very sandy soils. Usually in those types of soils on habitat that should be pinyon juniper, it's almost completely juniper, at least in my experience. But usually sometimes the Ponderosa pine thriving in places like this. I wonder if it's tapped down to bedrock. It might be shallower than I think here, but it's impossible to know without digging and I don't have a shovel. Oh well. There's a cactus I was trying to find a good specimen of to show you here too. I just saw some, but I really can't not talk about this one because it's so cool. All right, here it is. This may not look like much, but this is Opuntia aria. I'm almost positive it's what it is. And if you hear me talking about how Opuntia polycantha is a bit of a mess and there's a lot of different varieties to it that have been sometimes split off in different species and a lot of work to do, this is one example of what I was talking about. In fact, just the one I was really referring to most of the time, even though there's a lot of other ones. This species is what's normally considered just a variety of Opuntia polycantha, but it does look pretty different to regular polycantha. It has almost no spines. Actually, it usually doesn't have spines, and it often doesn't even have glaucids. It usually stays about this size and often spreads along the ground. Like, I kind of wonder if that little paddle is actually rooting into the ground there. And it's endemic to the sort of Dixie Divide region in Utah, like between Kanab and St. George, in the sort of uplands around 6,000 feet in elevation. Yeah, the coral pink sand dunes are actually kind of high in elevation. You know what? I've been thinking of a new name for my channel. Maybe Fast Talking Botanist would be an ideal one, or at least very descriptive one. It's trying to get the point across or give people a fair warning to how quickly I tend to talk. Kind of working on it a bit, but either way, cool plant. You can also find it a bit in Arizona in adjacent areas, but endemic to a very small corner of the United States. And this, of course, is Quercus campbellii, which I talk all about in the context as being part of a mountain brush in Utah, but you also see it growing in wetter areas of the Colorado Plateau, like where you get pinyon juniper naturally. And it can handle the sand pretty well, evidently. There are a few other species of sand-loving oak you can see in southern Utah, most notably like Havardii and Welshii. In fact, those are the only two. And they do look very similar to this one, but they also have pointed leaves, while this is, well, it's got the classic gentle-lobed leaves of Quercus campbellii. But yeah, they grow very thickety in different parts of the Colorado Plateau. You usually find thickets of them when you wander around long enough like this. Oh, and here is another favorite of mine in the region. This is Yucca angustissima, also known as the narrow-leaf yucca, which is a pretty apt name when you look at its leaves. They are very narrow. We're no longer, I believe, in the range of Yucca harrimanii. We might still get that here, but I haven't seen any. I'm pretty, I think, good at telling those two apart. I'm just not sure how Yucca baileyii is different from those few, but this one's really cool because it has very long, thin leaves, and it can make very tall stalks with larger fruit than either harrimanii or baileyii. And I guess the leaves at the base, they start sort of, you know, concave on top, convex on the bottom, but towards the base they become convex on both sides. Now on to deeper sand again. A lot of the species we just saw have dropped out, and it's mostly Scabrethia scabra and Ericameria nauseosa. Scabrethia scabra really likes the sand. Like, there are some species you see in sandy pinyon juniper, but this isn't one of them. This one you really need to be fairly deep sands and large sand dunes to find, in my experience, with a few exceptions. It's a cool looking species up close. And oh my gosh, I gotta figure out what this is. I am not fully sure. It's got 4 petals or 5. I don't know, it's a little hard to tell, but it does look interesting and it seems to like the deep sand. There's some bees all over it. Now we got another low spot there, another, is it dune and swale, another swale with Ponderosa pines growing all over the place. Another one I'm commonly seeing is Castellegia linearifolia. It's known as the Wyoming paintbrush. It's not a whole lot to talk about this plant in regards to its ability to tolerate sand. It really grows everywhere, so it's not special. You can see it here in my opinion. You find it growing in pretty much everywhere in the wetter portions of a desert, like in the Colorado Plateau, up to the high elevation forests in the Rocky Mountains, and everywhere in between. You can tell apart from other paintbrushes because its calyx, which is the pink thing we see, and those aren't actually the petals, that's the few sepals, is more deeply divided below than above. And the green petals, which are fused together, that form that tube right there, stick out very far. They're quite long in this species, but it's a great species. I'm a member of Oroboncaceae, so it's probably parasitizing something unless everything around it died. Seeing a lot of this plant. This is a dead specimen of Eriogonum alatum. I'll find a living one in a second, but they have very persistent dead stems that dot the landscape and they get quite tall. There's another one for you. I've seen them get up to 7 feet tall on some occasions. Now this is some other type of weird Eriogonum, but I'm not sure what species it is. It's got a bit of an inflated stem, not too inflated, but you know, enough. So I'm gonna get some pictures of it so I can try and identify it later. But it's interesting looking at it. I doubt it's actually inflated, but it might be a relative of it. I can see some living Eriogonum elatum specimens up there I want to check out. Well, there's a good example. This one's really short, but that's generally what it looks like when it's alive and putting out seeds. And this stem, and probably the whole plant, is going to die this year. I can't remember if it's an annual or a short-lived perennial, but you rarely see upper plants growing alongside the dead stems. There's one that looks like it was clipped. Really cool plant in my opinion. Oh, there's a tall specimen. Oh, cool. Like I said, you see them get up to 7 feet tall sometimes. Another reason dune environments are so tough for most plant species to tolerate is that they naturally lack a lot of organic matter. It's very slow for it to accumulate, and it just gets blown away and shifted around and mixed in everything. So there's no real topsoil layer. They have to grow more or less in pure sand. They have no choice. All the plants here. That's kind of interesting. You got a specimen of Persia tridentata, or antelope bitterbrush, growing on the deep sand here. My first time seeing a specimen of species growing in the deep sand on the coral pink dunes. You also got all these plants here, which either are young seedlings, I think that's most likely, but they also could be plants that are partially buried, or potentially plants growing up through the sand through the roots, like spreading through sand dunes the way I described earlier, which would be really shocking for this species because you generally don't see it on deep sand, so it likely means there's either an individual or a variety adapted to it. I'm pretty sure they're just seedlings though. I should mention that over time, plants have the ability to grow and stabilize sand dunes because as the wind blows around sand on the dunes, when they encounter plants, they basically bounce off it and fall to the ground, building a pile around them. Like, every time you see a plant, you can usually see a small mound of sand surrounding it. That's really the action for which plants get buried. It's not just the natural shifting of the dunes, it's the fact that they are natural barriers to moving sand, and they accumulate around them, which greatly increases the importance of being able to grow up through the sand and establish roots closer to the surface. But over time, as this happens again and again, they can build the dunes taller and taller, and some species are really good at it. They can make very steep dunes. Scabrethia scabra has got to be pretty good at building dunes. Like, who knows how deep this guy's roots go down, how deep the sand was here, or actually how much shallower it was when it started growing. Same thing with the, well, now dead, Ericameria nauseosa. In my previous video on the coral pink sand dunes that I filmed in 2023, there was an area I weeded a bunch of mullein or Bascum thepsis, and I think this is the same spot, and I'm glad to see there's very few plants growing back this time, just after 3 years. So I thought I left a few by accident, but it was a bit of a wetland site too, and this certainly seems, oh, it's not a wetland right now. It does look a lot like the wetlands at the campground that I stayed at. It was the same campground I was here last that were super dry. We look very similar, this area and the dry wetlands there, so I think it's the same spot potentially. I have to go back and check, but I'm happy to see the mullein is doing really poorly, and if all the other plants are suffering, I guess. Trying to find a way to get over the fence here, get to the goods, but I think I'm just gonna have to army crawl. It just seemed like there was better places to do it last time. There we go. Got some pretty Onothera pallida here. This species actually has a sand and often sand dune denizen, but I haven't seen much of it at the site for some reason. Now, what I showed you is mostly just a bunch of foredune stuff, but we're really about to get into the deep sand now. We'll hopefully see some really good stuff. In fact, I can already see a bit of it. As I said before, there are some plants that are very specialized to dunes. You often get species that are only found in various dunes, but occasionally you get species endemic to just a few or even one dune system. And we have one of them right in front of us. Or actually all over this place. Wow, my feet are sinking so much trying to get up here. But over here, we have some upcoming Asclepias welchii. So this is Welch's milkweed. This plant is one you only find not just the coral pink dunes. I said in my previous video it was endemic to the coral pink sand dunes. But you can also find it in some similar sandy areas in Arizona as well, but this is by far the largest population. Such a cool plant. Now, Asclepias welchii is very cool. It looks a lot like Asclepias speciosa, but I'm not even sure if they're closely related, and there are some key differences between the two. Firstly, the leaves on this species are covered in hairs, while on speciosa they are glabrous. Not so much on the lower down leaves, but on the upper leaves they get increasingly hairy until they look just like this. Almost silvery blue because they're covered in these matted woolly hairs. And look how much hair you got on the follicle there, like the fruit that this plant produces. So we can't see any in flower right now, but that's what it looks like. It's like a big puffball. And of course it can also propagate through its roots, growing up through the sand as it gets buried. And you really only see it growing in the very deep sand here, where it's deeper than like 30 feet on these big dunes, not on the foredunes on the other side of the fence. And here we only really got Calamovilfa gigantea or Sporobolus arenicola, whichever name you prefer, and a Scabrethia scabra growing in any abundance. And I guess also a few other things like that Ponderosa Pine. But there's a few other plants you might be able to see here that are really cool. I thought this is pretty cool. This Yucca angustissima must have started growing who knows how deep down. You can see all the roots it produced to take advantage of the sand that was burying at the time but are now exposed as the sand is getting blown away. So I've bent over and its top died here. As you can see the leaves that are now partially buried in sand over here, but it's producing some pups. These two specimens are from the exposed shoot system right there. Isn't that interesting? So strange looking. I thought they were just growing on some wooden posts when I first saw them. It made no sense until I figured out what was going on here. Of course, eventually the sand gets so deep, constantly shifting and steep, that nothing can grow on them. In fact, super deep sand is going to be another topic for my series on inhospitable places. For whatever reason, this hillside is just covered with this Sporobolus arenicola that's, I think it's pretty young and just starting to come up, as well as a bit of Asclepias welchii. Head down to the Ponderosa areas and see what's what. It's kind of cool. We got some Navajo Sandstone bedrock exposed in this swale. Quite a lot of it, actually. So no wonder the Ponderosa pines are doing so well here. I wonder how long this swale's been here, and how long it'll be until it gets buried again. It'd be really cool to see what the bedrock looked like what its texture and how much it undulates if you were to remove all the sand, because I wonder if there's maybe some ridges of bedrock that the sand built itself around originally. Also interesting to note that this seems like this is actually pretty pink and white, so if you mix all the colors you see here, I bet you get something pretty similar to this pink sand we have, though I would say most of the sand is probably not coming directly from here, but from all over the place, possibly even from the Virgin River. It just happens to get blown here and piles up against this mountain. Without flowers, it's a little hard to tell for sure, but I think this might be Sophora stenophylla, a species not endemic to the dunes, but pretty common here. And I think the genus Sophora tends to be tropical. This imagine is one of the more northern ranging members of the genus. I knew about Sophora previously before learning about the coral pink sand dunes from the species of tree that lives in Hawaii. Sophora Christ something or other, I can't remember the exact scientific name, but it grows as a tree in the montane forest on the Big Island and possibly Maui, and there's a specialized bird called, I think, the palila that eats its toxic seeds that are so toxic that like other birds will eat their seeds and drop dead within minutes, but they're able to handle the toxins there, and it's a really cool ecological relationship. Not sure how much further I'm going to go. It'd be cool to get to the other side of the dunes, but we'll see if I got enough time. Alright, actually this is a bit of a wetlandy swale. Not that wetlandy, obviously, but imagine it's a place where water tends to accumulate more because we're getting a lot of this here, which is some species of rush that I'm not going to be able to identify right now and possibly ever. But rushes are really cool and often an indicator of water, as is this species, which is clearly a willow. As you can see a few of here. If I'm lucky, I might find a dense like forest of willows, but this might just be Salix exigua, a coyote or sandbar willow. Something wouldn't be surprising at all if that's what it was. But yeah, both these species indicate a higher availability of water, and though there's probably never much surface water here, the water table is high enough that can support wetland plants like the rushes or juncus and some willows. Okay, now that I found some of the fruit, I am positive this is Sophora stenophylla, because look at those fruits. They're so obviously leguminous. Look at their cool reticulations on them, like a big chain of bubbles, or something I probably shouldn't mention. A whole thicket of willows growing at the top of this dune here. It's at the midsection of it. Different plants growing towards the bottom. It's very steep here too. I know willows can often be very prolific dune formers. Some of the adaptations they have to riparian and wetland lifestyles can actually lend themselves pretty good to the dunes because they have adaptations to getting their stems partially buried in sediment, so they have the same ability to grow through that new sediment and set their roots closer to the surface over time as they continue to get buried by fresh deposits, that the rivers lay down. And this is kind of cool. We got a long trailing root of one of the grass species. I thought this was some random vine at first that had died. I was going to have to try and identify, but no, it might just be maybe a Sporobolus arenicola perhaps. So they've seen some better days. All the Ponderosas died for some reason. Maybe they got buried. I doubt they can handle getting buried that much, even though they like to grow amongst the dunes. Of course, the fact that they're so old, yet growing out of dunes means they can maybe handle a little bit of it. I'm not sure how it works for these guys. Well, I reached the end of the dunes. I was expecting something more dramatic like a mountain is butting up against. I think that's more in the southern portion of the state park, not the northern wilderness study area though. Here it's just Juniper and Ponderosa Pine as far as the eye can see. Here we got some yuccas and gamble oak stabilizing the soil along with Scabrethia scabra and Sophora stenophylla. Is that a Sophora stenophylla? Actually, that's something different. I take that back. But either way, I'm going to head back now. This might be the end of the video. If it is, thanks for watching and see you next time. But if not, if I find like some actually more wetlandy places, you guys will know. So see ya for now. One right on that small dune over there. Most of it's covered, at least partially in vegetation, but we got this big sand slide right in the center. Interesting stuff. I don't see any tire tracks on it either. I do enjoy walking through this Ponderosa Pine forest in the swales. With lots of rushes on the ground. Were this anywhere else, I'd say this forest looks like it's pretty dense. It would need to be thinned eventually, but here I doubt there's any risk, even if it did catch on fire, of it spreading beyond the surrounding dunes. There's just so little vegetation on the dunes. It would probably just be completely contained to this region. And sometimes nature develops like that. Sometimes forests develop very thickly and dense because maybe there's a really good year where a bunch of seeds germinated and they never died out, creating a very tight forest. And though it's not the most biodiverse thing, there's probably animals and plants that prefer that kind of habitat, and fungi as well. Maybe some birds like the really dense forest. It probably keeps out some predators. I guess the question is, how much are we willing to tolerate that, and where, due to the risk places like this can pose as a fire hazard. Also a tick hazard. I really hope I don't get any ticks here. I don't think there's a lot of deer over here though, so there's probably not a stuff for them to eat. Heading back to the car, I'm seeing a lot of Arctostaphylos patula on the inner dune swells, especially on the higher portions of the inner dune swells like we are right here. Not seeing any rushes or other wetland type plants, but lots of this. The most widespread species of Arctostaphylos being found pretty widely in Utah, I imagine Arizona, and I think only second to Arctostaphylos uva ursi, which is found widely in both Eurasia and North America. I guess there's also Arctostaphylos alpina now as well. So considered separate species at this point. Wish I had a way to slide down this like a boogie board, that'd be fun. Oh well. One more thing I want to show you guys before I end the video. At the campsite across the road from the dunes that I stayed at, on all the number placards they have this engraving of a beetle, and I'm positive that's supposed to be the coral pink sand dunes tiger beetle. I didn't see any of those on the dunes, but it's a species completely endemic to the coral pink sand dunes, unlike the milkweed, which you can also find in some areas in Arizona. So I thought this is a neat little homage to this unique species to the area.